As a general matter, I don't know about you two, but nothing infuriates me more. Not so much the left doing. Expect the left to do crazy things. They're always going to do crazy things.
A rabid dog bites.
The rabid dog bites. When the right does not take advantage in the most opportune, most sort of power-seeking way possible, that's what annoys me most. And so I'm going to draw attention to one particular story, which in itself I don't regard as particularly interesting. You know, the left, they're in love with minutiae. You know, Stalin wanted to persecute Kamenev and Zinoviev and all these people. Trotsky. You know, the left does infighting almost better than it does sort of persecution of fascists and all that sort of thing. But so I don't know about you, but I'd actually forgotten about the existence of Diane Abbott. She hasn't been in the news for quite a while, but she's back there, back in the political spotlight at the moment.
How did you forget the two left shoes moment?
Can I just say, I actually don't dislike Diane Abbott.
This is a difference between us.
I know.
It's a very big difference. She's the perfect intersection of dumb and evil.
I agree.
Yeah.
Right? But there's something kind of bumbling and boomer about her that I actually don't find distasteful, and she's been a source of some tremendous political comedy. Just her mathematics, her dress sense. She said some remarkable things. And so I've come to the point where I kind of view her as almost a part of the furniture. Right? It's like, you know, she's just, okay, yeah, the Diane Abbott of politics. And so I don't hate her, and I don't find myself even disliking her, really. And I quite look forward to what she's done now. Every time something's happened. So I just want to make it clear that I'm not a hater of Diane Abbott at all.
She does. One thing I will say is that she does boast the distinct virtue, and there are Democrat left-wing politicians in the US who do the exact same thing of saying how the broader Democratic beast, or in our country, the Labour beast, is really thinking. Yes. People like Nancy Pelosi, people like David Axelrod, who are sort of more strategic-minded in politics, don't come out with the sort of remarks that someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will, or Rashida Tlaib will, and likewise Tony Blair won't let the cat out of the bag when speaking at some globalist conference. But Diane Abbott will just say what they think.
She's the impulsive id of the Labour Party.
Precisely that. But so I'm going to read from a BBC report, because there's currently, as people may know, there's currently talk about whether Diane Abbott is going to be deselected, and Starmer seems to be embarked on some kind of relentless purge of people who are more politically adjacent to Corbyn than they are to Blair. Let's put it that way. Those are probably the most useful ways of thinking about it. So as the BBC reports, Sir Keir has been accused of carrying out a purge of left-wing candidates and parachuting his own supporters into winnable seats. Veteran left-winger Diane Abbott says she has been banned from standing as Labour candidate, something Sir Keir denies, insisting no decision has been yet taken on her future. And so I don't think this is particularly interesting in itself. We'll see what happens in the coming days. Whether Diane Abbott runs in whatever her seat is, Hackney North and Stoke Newington, it could not possibly be of less interest to me. But you know, as we might expect, the far left is very agitated about all this, and they're trying to draw more general conclusions from it, and saying that this is indicative of Starmer's fundamentally unscrupulous character.
Well, I actually agree with them.
I do too.
Actually,
yes.
If the way Starmer governs the Labour Party is any indication on how he's going to govern the country,
exactly,
there's no reason that we think it shouldn't be.
Yes,
we're in trouble, lads. Starmer seems to be, honestly, arriving at the sort of position of a desk murderer, where he's just willing to sign off terrible things. And yes. I mean, the idea that Jeremy Corbyn isn't deserving of being in the Labour Party is kind of bizarre. You know, 5 years ago, who's the leader of the Labour Party? So, and Diane Abbott, and these people have been in the Labour Party the last 40 years. Mm-hmm. So the idea that these people, again, they're not part of the furniture of the Labour Party, yes. and Starmer can just ruthlessly, again, you know, lifetime of service, whether you agree with that service or not, and just say, no, you're gone to the gulag with you. And it's not just Diane Abbott and Jeremy Corbyn as well. I mean, like in Islington North, when Jeremy Corbyn got kicked out of the party finally, some of the councillors objected because obviously they're close to Jeremy Corbyn, and so Starmer kicked them too.
Well, yes. Lloyd Russell Moyle, who's the target of this Owen Jones tweet, he's in support of. Lloyd Russell Moyle was only on Julia Hartley-Brewer's show about a week ago, defending Keir Starmer to the death, saying that we need more migration because of lower birth rates, and like being again another id. He has in the past said we will fight our enemies in the streets at campaign rallies, so he is a massive liability for him. But he's a devoted far leftist, and Keir Starmer's gone almost at the 11th hour because the election's been called so close to the quick. He's cut him out for, as Owen Jones details here, Owen Jones' former flatmate and one of Keir Starmer's closest advisors. So he's replacing them with loyalists.
But this thing is very Stalin-esque. in these taxes. It's actually like quite shocking. And there was a report the other day where Keir Starmer in the Times where he's like, "Oh, I find it easy to be ruthless." And it's like, yeah, but that's the sign of a lack of empathy, Keir.
So he's being self-professed socialist.
Yeah, and sociopath.
Yeah, and it's strange that, and maybe at the level of method, if not ideology, you got Sir Keir Starmer being probably a little bit closer to Stalin in this scenario than Jeremy Corbyn was when he was himself leader. Admittedly, Jeremy Corbyn was probably not in a very strong position in terms of just sheer arithmetic to do a purge of the Parliamentary Labour Party, given the fact that the Parliamentary Labour Party was already pretty hostile to him, and he clearly had to climb down from a lot of former commitments. But nevertheless,
but so the reason I don't actually hate Diane Abbott or Jeremy Corbyn is because they don't seem to have this streak of cruelty in them, right? They're stupid. They believe crazy things, and
and dangerous if they were given power.
Wildly dangerous, that they have a very idealistic view of. They would undoubtedly be ruinous and catastrophic for the country. We undoubtedly would suffer, but they don't seem like cruel people. They don't seem like people who are just heartless and will just make really shocking decisions.
I don't think Diane Abbott, if I was knelt in front of her, would pull the trigger, but Keir Starmer would.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I don't think that Jeremy Corbyn would pull the trigger, but I think that Keir Starmer would, and I think he will.
Breaking news, Diane Abbott has been selected as Hackney's candidate.
Oh.
Well, we've just received some breaking news, and it turns out that all of this is redundant. No, fortunately not, because it's not the main focus of my thing, but it turns out that Diane Abbott actually she's not being deselected. And so maybe whether that's Keir Starmer jumping at the last minute, whether
Angela Rayner was going around
defending
her. So I wonder if it's a cabinet rebellion, because Starmer knows, not being funny, he's going to be in a precarious position when he gets in, and Wes Streeting and Angela Rayner are both very ambitious politicians, so they could mount a leadership challenge against him.
I'll just read the news on the BBC. So Abbott will be Labour's candidate in Hackney. Party source says, in the last few minutes, literally a couple of minutes ago, we've heard Labour leader Keir Starmer say Diane Abbott is, quote, free to go forward as a Labour candidate. A senior Labour source has clarified that this means Abbott will be Labour's candidate in the constituency of Hackney North and Stoke Newington. They also confirmed the National Executive Committee, NEC, Labour's governing body, will not block her. The committee will meet next week to endorse all Labour's candidates before nominations legally close on the 7th of June, a week from now. The full list of candidates running the Hackney North and Stoke Newington constituency will be on our website after nominations close.
But so, God, that was a knife edge, wasn't it?
Oh gosh, yeah.
Like, that was absolutely, like, this obviously was very, very close to not being
this decision would have been made very, very recently indeed. But nevertheless, there's a broader gripe that the far left of the Labour Party, although I think Owen Jones has actually now left the Labour Party. So, but nevertheless, the far left. No, he left. He did a whole video on why he left on principle. And people like Aaron Bastani as well, the kind of Navarra bros, the sort of Owen Jones bros.
Well, in this, he endorses a Green Party candidate.
Yes, indeed. So, and so clearly the left is going through, the far left at any rate, is going through a kind of crisis at the moment. And so we'll just read some of what Owen Jones is saying about the mentality, this exactly what Carl and Connor are talking about, the rather calculated cruelty which distinguishes Starmer from perhaps more naive, wet behind the ears radicals, who are still nevertheless very dangerous. So, okay, everyone, gather round, Owen Jones says. Here's a lovely little story for you all. Chris Ward, Keir Starmer's former chief of staff, was a long-time close friend of Owen Jones's. He stayed at my parents' flat in Edinburgh. We got drunk together, made repetitive Alan Partridge-based gags. We argued about politics a lot. Understandable, given his love of Tony Blair and unrepentant support for the Iraq War.
Jesus Christ.
There would have been some interesting conversations, perhaps. He was obsessed with becoming an MP in his hometown, Brighton. That's also my hometown for my sins.
Poor git.
I know. I'm a long-suffering Brightonian. He was obsessed with becoming an MP in his hometown of Brighton. His greatest ire wasn't reserved for the Tories, but for the Green Party, not least Caroline Lucas, who was something of a demonic figure for him.
Interesting.
We discussed his frustrations at his flatlining career. Sly dig there from Jones.
That's rich coming from Owen Jones.
Jill to that's lover vibes.
Quite so. Condemned to a years-long exile of being a parliamentary bag carrier until some new MP called Keir Starmer scooped him up. During the 2020 Labour leadership campaign, Chris Ward regaled me with fascinating tidbits, like Keir Starmer really wants John McDonnell to stay on as Shadow Chancellor. He would ring me up to promise me that pledges like increased tax on the top 5% were ironclad. In other words, okay, yes, there's going to be a change of personnel, but Keir Starmer is faithfully going to continue, at least in significant part, the Corbynite legacy, but basically trying to reassure people like Jones that this was a personnel change more than it was an ideological shift.
And this is what Starmer lied about the whole way through Jeremy Corbyn's tenure. He was a strong supporter of Jeremy Corbyn right up until he gained power.
Yes.
And then Jeremy Corbyn got gulagged as well.
Yes, indeed. And
It's ruthless.
And he was
absolutely ruthless.
And he was on. He's an incredibly slippery and suspicious character as well. He was on Beth Rigby's Sky News show the other day, and just sort of what's the name? Michael Howard levels of just dodging the question. I mean, Beth Rigby didn't ask him it 25 times. Like, do you regret supporting Jeremy Corbyn now that you're clearly at the helm of a purge of everyone who was ever sympathetic to Corbyn?
Now that you kicked him out of the party.
Exactly. Well, indeed.
Come on.
Well. During the 2020, oh no, I've read that, but he would bring me up, blah, blah, blah. Needless to say, I wasn't convinced by this. I wasn't convinced that the Corbynite legacy would be faithfully continued by Starmer, and didn't vote for his candidate. But there's an insight into just how pathologically dishonest that campaign was. This is what we're talking about. Broken clocks 2 times a day and all that, in the case of Owen Jones. He then went on to work for Hanbury Strategy, a corporate lobbying firm set up by 2 Tories, one of them the former PR lead for Vote Leave. What I would say is this, and this is where it gets...
Why would they hire a guy like that?
Because it's uniparty.
Of course.
This is where it gets a little bit tiresome from Jones. Lloyd Russell Moyle is a gay man, like all the politicians purged by Starmer so far, from a minority, more on the obsession with minoritarianism, and admitted it is the main point of this segment. Yeah. And the first of his family to go to university, who has been purged from his seat with the help of a nicely timed, vexatious complaint.
I think that was about sexually untoward behaviour, was it not?
In the case of Lloyd Russell Moyle?
Yes, I believe that was the case.
Yes.
So, again, lots of accusations of Tory sleaze, warranted for many MPs.
Yes. He doesn't have a name like Pincher, though, does he?
No.
Which is what tends to give it away.
No, but he does have Russell.
That's true. As Starmer's allies carve up parliamentary seats like colonial administrators divvying up their spoils, Ward, like a vulture, is set to steal this seat with not a single local member voting for him. Those local members should feel furious. They had a principled, independent-minded MP. They now have a professional political operator turned corporate lobbyist who will be a stooge for whatever his old boss tells him to say or do, and they have no say over the matter. Well, I think Brighton deserves better. Vote Elaine for Kemp Town for the Green Party.
Well, now he knows how Conservative members feel with Liz Truss being kicked out and installed Rishi Sunak instead.
Quite so. And there's a picture from sort of more halcyon days, I suppose, before the separation. In any case, so let's get on to the main point of this segment. Far less interesting to me than left-wing infighting, that's as old as time itself, is the completely hopeless angle so many people, on broadly speaking on the right, on the anti-woke side of the culture war, are taking on this issue. Because as people will likely remember, I think it was in April of last year, there we go, 23rd of April 2023, that Diane Abbott landed herself in some very serious trouble. And obviously it sounds like she's now going to be keeping her seat. But there was an internal investigation in the Labour Party, a lengthy investigation. She was cleared. She did apologise for it. But it goes to show what are the real tripwires in British politics and what are not the tripwires in British politics. And I think that anyone who isn't intent on taking politics seriously should make sure that any tripwires which do exist are laid in their favour and are not disadvantageous to your own side, because then all you're doing is operating and playing under the rules of your professed political enemies. And so this is what Diane Abbott actually said. She said, so from the Observer, 23rd of April 2023, I think Tomima Owolade, I'm not very good at this. Well, I think he writes for the New Statesman and for the Times occasionally, but he's an intelligent young commentator who wrote a piece saying racism in Britain is not a black and white issue, it's far more complicated. And so Diane Abbott then wrote a letter into, looks like the Observer, to take issue with what Tomiwa had been saying. Tomiwa Owolade claims that Irish, Jewish and traveller people all suffer from racism. They undoubtedly experience prejudice, she says. This is similar to racism, and the two words are often used as if they are interchangeable.
Now I'm going to have an intersectional debate with Diane Abbott on the definition of racism.
Indeed so. And it's getting more and more minutiae. They do like it. It is true that many types of white people with points of difference, such as redheads, can experience this prejudice, but they're not all their lives subject to racism. In pre-civil rights America, Irish people, Jewish people, and travellers were not required to sit at the back of the bus.
Irish people, in fact, were. The N-word was used for Irish people in America.
White ends, they used to call
it.
Yeah,
that was true, yes. Yeah. So that, again, Diane Abbott said something stupid. Grass is green.
It has been known to happen, Connor. In apartheid South Africa, these groups were allowed to vote, and at the height of slavery, there were no white-seeming people manacled on the slave ships. So that was the
only example of slavery in all of history.
But that's, again,
so tight.
1.25 million English people were kidnapped by the Barbary pirates and sold into slavery.
Indeed, in North Africa, and no one troubling them for reparations. no one troubling them whatsoever for reparations. And of course, in Africa as well, in West Africa, it's one thing to engage in slavery and to express obvious to express in-group preferences to the point that are so grotesque that you're willing to enslave people who are in part of your out-group. It's another thing altogether to sell your own people into slavery. That was what happened on the coast of West Africa. At that time, in the 17th and 18th centuries, white people didn't feel particularly confident going too deep into Africa because there were all sorts of diseases which they would not have immunity to, and there was an understanding that this was not a wise thing to do. That's why they relied on tribal warfare going on in West African states at the time, and slave shippers deliberately strategized based on where the tribal warfare was, because that's where you would be most likely to have copious slaves coming to the shore and taking them across the Atlantic. But yes, as I say, the framing has been all wrong on this. So obviously, I think the main point that I would want to make here is that this is Carl just said it. This is textbook intersectionality from Diane Abbott. There's a sort of hierarchy of victimhood going on here. Yeah. And there's always been an awkward point of tension in left-wing discourse about Jewish people in particular, because a lot of people, a lot of race-baiting communists, a lot of lying race-baiting communists, like the people at Hope Not Hate, they effectively think of Jews as essentially white.
Yes.
If anything, they think of them as super whites, because an incredibly successful minority, which in itself is, I mean, if the whole society is structured around the concerns of the white majority, and yet you have this massively overperforming minority living in those societies successfully, as Jews have done for 2 centuries in Anglo countries, not everywhere, but in Anglo countries in particular, very philo-Semitic, they've had elite overrepresented status. That causes a real problem for people who are intent on demonizing the white majority, like Diane Abbott would want to do. And so there's always been among race communists, there has always been a slight ambiguity about where do we classify the Jews, and they also don't like the fact that the Jews have managed to perch at the top of the intersectional victim hierarchy since the Holocaust.
Well, I mean, it seems to be the most obviously heinous act that any of these groups can appeal to.
Indeed so.
From the gays, no, this is definitely the worst thing.
Indeed so. And so I think they rather resent the power which they perceive that to have as a way of shutting down other people's concerns, because it is fundamentally a game of competitive hierarchy. So this is partly what drives, this is in large part the fact that they regard Jews as essentially white, I would say is what partly, in large part, drives their contempt for Israel, because you have this idea that it is fundamentally a European settler colonial state, which is militating against the interests of brown people, or it could be black people, but fill in the blank here. So the thing that I find most concerning about of all gens about this is the fact that many people on the anti-woke side of politics are treating Diane Abbott's views as some kind of shock revelation, as though she wasn't already inducted to all of this language game in the first place.
This is new for Diane Abbott.
Yes, gosh, all of a sudden there's just a random, unwise moment of candor after a sterling political career, and I don't want to pick on anyone in particular, but for illustrative purpose, I will do so. It was Brendan O'Neill who wrote what I regarded as a very weak piece indeed in The Spectator, and I
like Brendan as well.
Yeah, well, this this is the interesting thing. So everyone I know about Brendan, people have said that he's one of the nicest people you ever meet, and I'm sure that's true. So none of this is personal. That should be said in advance. But he wrote a piece in The Spectator titled "The Tragedy of Diane Abbott," as though an otherwise sterling, laudable, he even uses the word trailblazing political career had been tragically brought low at the last minute by an ill-advised remark. And that's just not how it seems to me. We'll go to Diane Abbott's history of racist comments in a minute, but I'd like to read a bit of Brendan's piece, if I may, to give people an idea, and perhaps you gents will have some comments. Here's the tragedy of Diane Abbott. Brendan O'Neill writes, "She entered British politics as a trailblazer for black Britons, and now she leaves public life on the sour note of insulting Jewish Britons. She started out as a warrior against racism, but ended up seeming to minimize racism. She devoted her political career to standing up for beleaguered minorities, and then made the grave moral error of playing down the beleaguering of Britain's Jewish minority."
What if the roles were reversed?
Basically.
Wow. Yeah. Anything about contempt for white people for the last how many years?
Not in the whole article.
The only thing that we care about is racism. That's it.
As directed against minorities, though.
As directed against minorities. Good point.
Yes,
good caveat. Yeah.
I mean, but note the single. So note that that Diane Abbott's single-minded obsession with minority interest, which has consistently manifested itself, note how it's precisely the same moral language that Brendan O'Neill in that article is paying
She's
recourse
just using
to.
it wrong.
She's just using it the wrong way. You've got your intersectional jumble mixed up. And I'm sure Brent O'Neill wouldn't like to hear me put it like that, but that's effectively what is going on. Why don't we play the clips? And this is Diane Abbott's history of genuinely racist comments. The foray into suspicious comments about the Jews is a rather more recent affair for Diane Abbott. Look at her more long-standing prejudices.
Divide and rule. We shouldn't play their game. I could never imagine Michael saying that, changing that to saying black people love playing divide and rule.
What happens, yeah.
And what would happen if he said it? You didn't speak in code. That was quite a racist remark, was it not?
No, I don't think it's racist. I think
What, to say that white people, not some or a few or even many, but white people as a group love playing divide and rule. In justifying your decision, which we talked about before, don't want to dwell on that, to send your son to a private school, you said, quote, West Indian mums will go to the wall for their children. So black mothers love their kids.
Sorry, just in the interest of time, I'm going to pause. This is actually not very controversial in Britain, for anyone who doesn't know. Diane Abbott, I mean, you can see how many years ago this video was obviously, this question time appearance or whatever was taken. But we're just in the interest of time.
Okay, sure.
On,
yeah, well, no, my general take on this is that there is no tragedy.
This is what Diane Abbott's been like for a long time.
Of Diane Abbott here, and I'm going to, at the risk of being accused of pomposity, which is a risk that I am occasionally willing to take, Greek tragedians have words for what are the hallmarks of tragedy, and none of them in this case are operative. Well, one of them is. So there's this idea that in tragic theatre, there is a reversal of fortune that goes on. And in fact, actually, it sounds as though Diane Abbott's going to be keeping her seat. So there's not even that anymore. She doesn't even have that claim to be a tragic figure. But there's no tragic fall. There's no hamartia, which is what the Greeks would call it. And there's certainly no sober recognition of wrongdoing, which is the anagnoresis part of Greek tragedy. The problem with O'Neill's analysis is that he couches it purely in terms of minoritarian interests, and he completely neglects the fact that Abbott has long been a race-baiting, anti-white communist, and this does not suddenly magically become wrong and vindictive once that sort of malicious rhetoric is directed at a rival minority group. It's just as evil and vindictive. It was wrong all along, just as well as when it's directed at majorities. And so one of the things that I'm very eager to press here is that we on the right, broadly speaking, Brendan O'Neill would want to say, no, I'm still a leftist, whatever. Okay, fine. Us on the anti-woke side of politics, we need to stop indulging in the left's own moral language games, because when you win, quote unquote, on the left terms, in a larger sense, you are losing monumentally. And that's what's most important of all.
Correct.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters. And if you want to see what else we're up to, you can go on the website and see us have a lot of fun on Lads Hour. This is where, we're behind a paywall and we have a laugh, we have some fun. It's a good antidote to the politics of the day. And if you want to see what other work we're up to, you can follow us on Twitter and you'll see everything else that we're doing. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.